Thank you very much. It is great to be here today, and it's great to actually get to talk about some of my absolute favorite topics. Software, software people, software innovation, the act of building software. You kind of get the idea, don't you? I'm a big fan of software and really everything related to it. And I'm here to talk today about really how it is that software people and software companies are really forming the backbone of nearly every company and taking over in nearly every industry, or at least that is what is going to happen in the not too distant future. So to get started, my talk is really titled here, The Ways of the Software People and the Ways of the Dodo. So, quick introductions. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and I am a software developer. After my college education, where I learned how to code, I started 3 companies, very different companies in very different industries, doing different things. I had a college academic website, live event ticketing exchange called StubHub, a bricks and mortar retailer for extreme sporting goods called 9star, and then I was a product manager at Amazon Web Services in the early days of AWS. Now, when I left Amazon, I knew I wanted to start my next thing, and I was looking around at a bunch of ideas. And I thought about what are some of the problems that I've had in the past, and I realized that I had 2 common threads between all of the companies that I had started previously. The first common thread was, in every single one of those companies, I was using the agility of software to build a great customer experience. Right? The ability of software to iterate rapidly, keep a backlog, go sprint after sprint, and always reprioritize based on the feedback you're getting from your customers, right? This is the superpower of software, that agility. The second common thread was that at every one of those companies, I had needed communications at one point or another to build that great customer experience. Now, when I say communications, I don't mean like the desk phone for the employees. I mean communications that was somehow deeply integrated into the software we were building that touched our customers every single day. Now, a funny thing happened when, we're software developers. We said, well, we don't know anything about communications. How do we do this? And so we turned to the industry, the communications industry, and say, how do we build this? And every time I got the same answer. It was, sure, we can help you build that. You're going to run these wires from the carrier to your data center. Then you're going to rack up all this telco servers. And then you're going to bring in professional services to come and integrate this whole stack of esoteric stuff. And that'll cost $2 million, and it'll take 24 months. Sign here. And every single time I said, well, first of all, $2 million, we're a startup. We don't have $2 million. But more importantly than that, the idea that you would spend 2 years on your first iteration of something was insane to a software person. Right? We're used to shipping every 2 weeks, constantly reprioritizing based on feedback from customers. The idea that you would spend 2 years doing any single thing was completely contrary to the whole ethos of software. And so in 2008, we started Twilio to solve this problem. We're a developer-first company with a mission to transform every software application with communications. So that's the background on the company. But now, it's interesting when you think about what those telecom industry was saying when they kept saying, here's this 2-year, multi-million-dollar project that we want to embark on. They use this language that you often hear in the world of IT and in the world of software. It's build versus buy. Right? We've all heard that. How do you build versus buy, right? And vendors are always out there telling you build versus buy is the fundamental question you got to ask yourself. And they always frame it as, well, this is the smart thing to do. Right? They have these cliches that don't tell you have to buy, but pretty much tell you you're an idiot if you don't. Right? Why would you reinvent the wheel? Right? Focus on what's core to your business. Right? You hear these refrains over and over, which is essentially code words for, you know you're going to give me a check, right? And the thing is, they're saying it is bad to build. But the funny thing is, as a software developer, we've figured out that agile development, this iterative process, is the right way to build software. Right? We figured out how this works because, we know that these big projects aren't predictable, either in cost or in time they're going to take to implement. We know that small milestones measured very granularly, like in weeks, are actually quite predictable. And that most importantly, the problems are actually changing more rapidly than we can actually build the solution. right? So don't bother with that big project. Just keep to your small milestones and be agile, right? And that's how we as software people operate, right? And we have this notion, right? You're gonna build something, is where you start, right? You release it to customers, you go get feedback. From that feedback, you revise your plans, and then you start your next iteration, right? This very clean process for building software. But now think about what happens when you buy software. It typically starts with, well, an RFP. You've already lost, you know that, because an RFP means you know all the requirements up front. But let's keep this forward, right? So you do your vendor selection process, you go to all the vendors, finally you pick one, you sign a contract, you hand them a check, and then you go to implementation and they deliver it to you, and then you iterate and do the next. No, just kidding, you stop. That's where it all ends, right? And if you want to make changes to it, it's another RFP, another vendor selection, another big check cut, right? This whole vendor process is waterfall all over again. And we as software people know that waterfall just doesn't work, right? And so software people, right, we think differently. And I've always thought about this, but I actually sat back a while ago and thought, well, what is it that defines a software person? And I thought back to my time at Amazon, and actually an all-hands meeting, where Jeff Bezos was taking questions from the audience. And someone asked some question, I don't remember what it was, something about are we opening physical stores or whatever, and he had this answer that I remember. I don't remember the question, I just remember the answer. He said, you know, in case you don't know it, Amazon.com is not a retailer. Amazon is a software company. We write software. It just so happens that our software causes a brown box to show up on your doorstep with something in it, right? Now, our friends across the pond in Redmond, Washington, they write software, but they send you a CD-ROM. Ours just sends you everything else. But we're a software company as much as they are, and that always stuck with me. Wow, that's amazing. And he said, our ability to win in this retail market is our ability to arrange magnetic particles on hard drives better than our competition. And that always stuck with me. Wow, software people, those who solve business problems with magnetic particles, right? What a fascinating definition. But it's, you know, who are these software people? And I'm going to say it's not just software developers. It is anybody inside of the organization who thinks a certain way. It is not a skill set, it is a mindset, right? It's anybody who sees the world through the lens of software. And this isn't just developers, it can be anyone inside of the company, product people, CEOs, your CFO, operations, sales, anybody who fundamentally sees the world through software and says, how can I solve this business problem with software? Right, he looks at a problem and says, how can I do that? Because software people fundamentally believe that any business problem can be solved once it's brought into the domain of software. It's this endless optimism, right? And the good news is it's the best time ever to be a software person now in business. Why? Because more and more of the world's problems are becoming addressable by software people. So what do we mean by this? Well, if you think about software as a generalization, right? Software takes in some part of the world and digitizes it, does some software on it, and then kicks something back out into the real world. But if a computer didn't do this, we wouldn't know what was happening inside the black box. It would be useless to us. So this is the generalized abstraction of computation. And the last 60 years of computers have been us getting more and more sophisticated in the inputs and outputs that computers can handle, right? What started with punch cards and teletype machines, right, moved into, you know, the ability to take text input with a keyboard or a laser printer for text output, right? And then we got more sophisticated, and you had audio capture cards and video capture cards that you can now compute on, and you can actually look at it in 20-year segments, right? The first 20 years of computers were solving numerical problems, right? Number crunching, missile trajectories, weather, things like that, right? Then the next 20 years of computing were solving text problems, word processing, spreadsheets, and this is when the computer moved into the office, and you had one on your desk, right? The next 20 years of computers were multimedia problems, audio, video, and we got MP3s, and we got YouTube, and we got Jurassic Park, right? And now we're in the next phase of computing, which is everything else. Because we are starting to digitize the entire world, right? If you think about the number of sensors and actuators that there are attached to our collective computers, right, that is rapidly, more than any time in the past, proliferating. Primarily because of this, the smartphone, right? Because the modern smartphone is just a bucket of sensors and actuators that is with us at all times in the world and is always connected to the computers of the world via the cloud, right? And this has completely changed what it means to be able to compute on the world. And this is why you see so much innovation now happening in the world. And so this software mindset is starting to invade every single market. Let me give you some examples. How many of you have a remote control at home for your cable box that looks something like that? Right, they advertise it with the number of buttons it has, like the new 197 button remote, right? And that's like a good thing, right? But what it means is that anything this remote will ever do was pre-programmed at the factory and baked into plastic and rubber. And if you want new functionality, you have to buy a new, the new 240 button remote, right? Well, now meet what software people do. That's the Apple TV remote, at least the old Apple TV remote. I didn't update it. But you can see it's got like 3 buttons. Why? Because the real product here is the software. And the more you bake into metal and plastic is the less flexibility you have going forward. And with those 3 buttons, they can update the software on that Apple TV as often as they want. Every week, every day, fixing bugs, answering new competition, answering to customers, making it better. Let's look at another industry. Credit card readers. I've encountered a lot of these in Berlin, right? That credit card reader, all the functionality that thing will ever have was baked in the factory when it was manufactured. Right, now see what software people do. Square. Right, the only bridge into the physical world is a tiny 5-cent piece of plastic. Everything else is reserved for software. Why? Because again, they can update that software as often as they want. Let's look at cars, right? Not software people build a lot of buttons into the dashboards. But software people bake as little as possible into the hardware of the automobile because they know they're going to update it with software later. And this is the story of Tesla, right? And Tesla owners know that you get software updates over the air that make the car better. My favorite story is they had a PR incident where a car hit some piece of debris on the highway, and the car caught fire. Everybody was safe, but it was a big PR fiasco. And so you know what Tesla did? They issued an over-the-air update to raise the ride height of the car at freeway speeds by 1 inch. Done. Right? At any other auto manufacturer, that would have been a 10 million car recall, right, at tremendous expense. And I don't mean to pick at any wounds here. So that's the story of how software people approach this problem, right? Think about phones, right? Not software people as the cell phones that we had, the feature phones, right? Well, along came Steve Jobs and introduced the iPhone, and he got rid of the keyboard, and everyone said, well, you can't get rid of the keyboard, but he correctly assessed that anything you fixed into plastic meant you couldn't update it later and it couldn't get better. So he got rid of the keyboard and turned it into software. And that allowed maximum flexibility for the phones we now have today. So that's in the consumer market. What about in the enterprise market? Well, this is the latest and greatest of Cisco's office telephone. You can see it's got a screen, it's got a whole lot of buttons, and sure, there's a lot of software running in that thing. Right? I'm sure Cisco employs a whole lot of software engineers in the world. But the thing is, I can tell you for certain that this is not software. Why? Because you might not be software people when this is how you scale it out. That is not a Photoshop. That is an actual product photo from the Cisco website. I'm not making that up, right? We software people know that the optimal telephone is the minimum bridge between the physical world and our software that is needed to bridge those two worlds, and everything else should be left to software, right? This is the optimal telephone, a speaker and a microphone. That's all you actually need to bridge the physical world into a computer. Everything else should be left up to software, right? So software people preserve agility, even when they attack hardware markets, right? Because they know agility is the ability to adapt and adapt quickly. And this is very important. And I quote Forrester Research here. Harley Manning of Forrester Research says, "The only source of competitive advantage is the one that can survive technology-fueled disruption. an obsession with customer experience, right? This is what is causing our software to move from the back office to the business model. It used to be that you use software for your ERP, for your CRM, for some accounting function, for some shipping and receiving, right? And the IT department was tasked with racking and stacking servers and making those things run. But customers never knew, and customers never cared what software you bought for the back office of your company, right? But now, software is the business model. Software is your interface to your customers, no matter what your industry is, right? And so I like to summarize this as, you no longer get points for using servers, you only get points for serving users. And that's the point, right? Customers don't care if you have a whole team racking up servers. Doesn't matter. What does it do for the customer experience? And this customer experience is getting fueled by amazing new technologies, right? Think about the cloud. We all know about the cloud this, cloud that, right? Well, if you think of the cloud as being really two things, you've got SaaS and web applications on one side, and the other side you have mobile applications. And behind it is scale, global software, right? These are the experiences that we all know and we all interact with every day. Well, behind these cloud applications is a new kind of infrastructure, something unlike what existed 10 or 15 years ago. And these are cloud platforms for software developers. They allow software developers to build applications at unprecedented speed and with unprecedented flexibility. And the common threads here, they're global. You can build an application once and deploy it everywhere in the world to a global customer base. They're scalable, they're cost-effective when you're just getting started for that experiment that may or may not be the blow-up success. But when it is, it scales up, right, to meet your customer demand, right? These cloud platforms for developers are changing what it means to build software, because you no longer have to plan huge budgets, huge timelines. This supports the agility of software unlike any technology that has ever come before. And it's not just one kind of platform. Cloud platforms are changing every part of the software stack, right? Like compute, that's EC2. Right? Or payments, that's Stripe or Braintree. Maps, Google Maps, analytics, storage, S3, right? You're not racking up EMC units anymore. You're spending a penny to integrate S3, right? And when it comes to communications, well, that's what Twilio does. And these platforms are making it faster and easier than ever for a developer to stand up an idea and figure out if it works. And if it does, let it scale. And if it doesn't work, great, you just spent a few $100 maybe. Or the prototype you could have built for $10. Oh well, what's the next idea? And this is the essence of software. And it's happening faster than ever before. And if you notice, it's happening in a customer-facing capacity. Software as a service, mobile apps, it's what the customer is now interacting with. It's not the back office. And so if you notice, software people are still buying, but they're buying smaller building blocks. They're buying the building blocks that enable that agility. So it's not to say you have to build everything from scratch, grinding your own silicon dust and making your own chips. No. You're still buying, you're just buying something more flexible, more agile to support that power of software. Because software people value continuous iteration over monolithic, inflexible solutions. Because agility is valued over all else to the software mindset. And when you sit back and think about it, you realize that in order to differentiate yourself in the eyes of your customer, you must be building. By definition, having the same ERP as your competition, the same CRM, right? Those don't differentiate you. By definition, you cannot buy differentiation, because once you have it, your competitor will have it too, right? No, the only way to have differentiation is to build it, not to buy it. And this leads us to the next stage of how business is going to run. I firmly believe it is going to be a Darwinian natural selection. Companies that can adapt most quickly to the changing needs of consumers are going to be the ones that survive. And that's why every industry will eventually become a software industry, because software can adapt the quickest to changing customer demands. So developers at your companies, they don't just write the code. They are defining your future and deciding your fate, because software is eating every industry. So the decision truly is not whether to build versus buy, it is whether to build versus die. And I believe that is the case, right? You go the way of the software people, or you go the way of the dodo. And that's my lesson, and that's how software is changing business today. Thank you very much. Great chatting with you today.